Hidden in the Heartland.
I'm Hugh McCulloch. I'm a retired economist from Ohio State University, and now living in New York City and part-time at NYU, and have had an interest in archaeological items, including evidence of Old World contacts with the New World. So I kind of got into this through barryfell's book, America BC, and kind of tracked down some of the things he talked about and some of the things he didn't talk about. Well, I had been interested in languages, German and French, and etymologies, and what are the origins of different English words, and how languages teach us connections between cultures. Phil pointed out you don't have to learn languages, learn alphabets, which is a lot easier, and you can see all kinds of connections just through alphabets. So you only have to learn 20 or 80 letters. You don't have to learn thousands of words. So I was too lazy to learn more languages than French and German, so I got excited about this epigraphy concept, that you can just look at an inscription and maybe figure out what the alphabet is, and then figure out who left the inscription. He argued that there were a lot of Indian writing systems had Old World origins, and one thing he didn't mention was the Cherokee syllabary, which is the most famous Indian writing system. And so I tried to think, well, maybe there's some Old World origins of that. And so I tried to find the oldest Cherokee inscription I could find, and if you could hand me that little tablet there, ran across a book on the Cherokee in pre-Columbian times and found this little inscribed tablet in that book by Cyrusthomas in 1890, and I looked at it and turned it over, and looked kind of Semitic to me, looked like some other Semitic inscriptions that barryfell had talked about, and I contacted Cyrusgordon, who was a Semitic scholar at Brandeis at the time, and he said, oh yeah, I've written articles about this. This is Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew from the 1st or 2nd century AD. It says Lihud in Paleo-Hebrew letters like the ones on the coins of the First Jewish War in around 70 AD. And this was actually found by the Smithsonian's Mound Survey in 1889. So in the 1880s, the Smithsonian had this huge mound survey project to excavate mounds and see what's really in them, because amateurs had found all kinds of crazy things, inscribed tablets and things like that. And so they wanted to prove that when the scientists did it systematically, there are no Old World inscriptions there. And so the only inscription they found was this, and upside down there's a couple letters that looked like Cherokee, so they said, Cyrusthomas said, well, it must be Cherokee, because it's got funny letters. Cherokee used funny letters. That's all the deeper he looked into it. So I compared it to both Hebrew and Cherokee and found that, yeah, Hebrew fits a lot better than Cherokee. There are a couple letters that could be Cherokee, but it's really not Cherokee. This has kind of been my pet stone ever since then, or pet rock, so to speak. And then I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and discovered that just 40 miles down the road from Columbus, there's some earthworks in Columbus that are in Newark, Ohio, the next county over, there's a biologist named Bob Ulrich at Denison who had written an article pointing out there were 5 Hebrew stones found in earthworks around Newark, Ohio. This one, which is called the Decalogue Stone, which is written all over in funny letters, it turns out that it's a stick letter version of regular square Hebrew, kind of reminiscent of like the copper scroll is written in stick letters, not in brushstroke letters. And it was translated right away by the local minister as being a condensed version of the 10 Commandments. And someone went to an awful lot of trouble to write this because it's very carefully laid out, and it's kind of like a prayer stone. You read it and roll it around, then you get back to where you started and read the whole thing over again. So these prayer wheels are a common device in religions of the period, that you read a prayer and then come back to where you start and just read it over again. And there's a figure on the front here who's identified as Moses over in Moshe in letters over his head. And of course this was denounced as a hoax immediately. And this is one of the reasons why the Smithsonian did this big mound survey to prove that things like this don't show up when real scientists like them do it. They never find inscribed stones. So this was found by the county surveyor, who was trusted by everyone to lay out their land. And you trust him to draw your boundary, you must trust him. And no one doubted his integrity. They thought maybe he had been hoodwinked, but well, first off, it's too elaborate for a hoax. No one would go to this trouble. It was inside a stone box, which is very carefully carved to hold it, which is more trouble than you go through for a hoax. And then a few years later, after his death, the local banker, in conjunction with a doctor, found another inscribed stone in the same site, from the same site, with the same kind of letters, which is a few phrases from the Ten Commandments. So that verifies his find of that. And actually, a couple of years earlier, he had found a surveyor, David Wyrick, had found another stone called the keystone, which has some readily recognizable Hebrew inscriptions on it. Again, this is a prayer wheel. You'd read one side and then turn it and read the next side and turn it, read the next side, turn it, read the next side, then you're back where you started and just keep going 10 times or whatever your quota of prayers is for the day. Allworth points out there were actually 2 more inscribed stones from Newark found after Wyrick's death, and one of them, called the inscribed head, has just has like 5 Hebrew letters on it's a head with 5 letters on the forehead, and I was trying to figure out what the inscription said. There was this local dentist named John H. Nickel who claimed that he had forged these and planted them for Wyrick to find. He was present when these other 2 stones were found, and I tried to figure out what the Hebrew letters mean, but they say Yud Het Nun Kaf Lamed, which would be how you would write J.H. Nickel if you were writing it in Hebrew letters. So apparently he had written his own name in Hebrew letters on this stone. So indeed there were 2 hoaxes. So that complicates things. You get some promising things and you get some hoaxes. But I think those are probably genuine. The batcreekstone, the first one I showed you, is certified by the Smithsonian as an authentic artifact. Now Cyrusthomas said didn't recognize it as Hebrew, which just proves that he was incompetent to identify an old world inscription if one were to bite him on the nose, as that one did. And then a young man named Jackson Judge from Indiana called my attention to a illustration in Squire and Davis's book about the Ohio Earthworks, published in 1848. And one of the illustrations was based on this drawing here, was a picture of what looks like a candelabrum here with 9 branches, which is the Hanukkia menorah. So that would appear to be a Hanukkia menorah, which would be totally bizarre. How could you have a Hanukkia menorah in an Ohio earthwork? But we've got the batcreekstone is Hebrew, and the Newark Decalogue Stone is Hebrew, and now we've got a giant earthwork that has apparently has a Hebrew symbol in it. Now this Hanukkia represents a miracle that was supposed to have happened when an oil lamp that only had enough oil when they were rededicating the temple in 165 BC, after the defeat of the Seleucids by Judah Maccabee. They had an oil lamp that burned miraculously for 8 days, even though it only had enough oil for 1 day. And sure enough, the top part of this outer enclosure here looks to me just like an oil lamp. And furthermore, it has a false bottom in it, leading to a large reservoir big enough to hold an 8-day supply of oil. So it not only commemorates the miracle, but it explains it in natural terms. Some people say this is a thunderbird. If you turn it like this, there are thunderbirds that look kind of like that, with the wings. Here are the wings and the feathers hanging down, I guess representing rain. There were a lot of birds in Hopewell art, but I don't recall any thunderbirds like that in Hopewell art. But You can call it whatever you want. Bill Romaine, the archaeologist, likes to call it a thunderbird. I like to call it a menorah, so you can take your pick what it is. But I think the enclosure plus the fact that we've got these other Ohio artifacts make it kind of a serious possibility. Squire and Davis was really a third-hand, this is best known from Squire and Davis's book, but that was really a third-hand depiction of it. So they got their picture from an intermediate book by David Bailey Warden, published in 1830. And his ultimate source was this map, which I tracked down and found in the National Archives in Alexandria, Virginia, the military branch of the National Archives. So this is the 1803 original map, done either based on a survey by William Lytle, who was a famous Ohio pioneer, the founder of Claremont County, Ohio, and he became ultimately the Surveyor General of the Northwest Territories. So he was and he surveyed all kinds of land in Claremont County, so he was a very avid surveyor. Had created this map for Thomas Jefferson. It turns out that there was a Senator John Brown communicated between Lytle and Jefferson was very interested in these earthworks. This is on the East Fork of the Little Miami, 20 miles, about 30 miles east of Cincinnati. These are the Milford works. From Milford, it's about 10 miles east of Cincinnati. Lytle did this map for Thomas Jefferson, and that's how it ended up in Washington in the National Archives, actually the files of the War Department, ultimately, because they thought it was a fortification, or this describes it as a fortification. Though this was already ancient at the time, there were trees, huge trees on it, so it was obviously abandoned. There was no military significance in 1803, but it was just cultural significance. We don't know exactly why Jefferson was so interested, but my theory is it was the Louisiana Purchase. That in 1803, he was negotiating buying Louisiana from Napoleon, who had just grabbed it from Spain. And there was a danger that if Napoleon ever lost, Spain would come back and say, hey, he had no right to sell it, now give it back to us. So Jefferson, and furthermore, it all belongs to us anyway, because Columbus discovered it and we were here first, and so everything belongs to Spain, and so we want it back now. So I think he was anxious to prove that there were other people had been present before the Spanish. I think he was interested in the theory that the Mandans spoke Welsh. I mean, he was fine if there were Welsh people out here, and I think he recognized this as a menorah and said, well, it looks like there were some Jewish explorers here. So I think that's why he was interested in this particular map. So this is quite a large earthwork. This is 2,000, it says this is 2,000 feet by 2,000 feet, so this is 100 acres. No, there's a problem here. We don't know exactly where this earthwork was, because it says, the caption here says that it's, this is detached from this stuff, and it's on the East Fork of the Little Miami River, about 20 miles from its junction with the Little Miami, which is down here. So this is 20 miles away from this stuff. But we don't know, there's a problem that the Little Miami swings south from Milford and then comes back up north, and that curve is all 20 miles away from Milford. So it could be, there's a whole arc here where it's all 20 miles from Milford, from the mouth of the East Fork of the Little Miami River. So there's like 15 mile stretch where this earthwork could be. So no one's ever really located this thing. It was there in Lytle's time in 1803, but already in Squire and Davis's time in 1848, they couldn't find it. They would have loved to have found it, but they said it once existed, and they were totally confident that it once existed, but they weren't sure exactly where it was. So there's a couple of clues here that it says that this is a valley, and here's a spring leading to some a stream which says it's waters of the East Fork of the Little Miami River. So even this might be a little tributary of the East Fork. it says it's probably up on a high plain, and there's the drainage is down here toward the river. There's probably a lowland. There's another source that says this is a lowland headed out this way, is what this indentation is. So it appears it's up on a high plain surrounded by lower land that flows into the river. But I'm betting that if we can find where this thing is, and then if we dig at these points, we'll find charcoal, because I'm betting that once a year they had a celebration here where they had bonfires at the ends of each of these branches here, which they lit by carrying a torch from the central one, lighting one on the first night and two on the second night and so forth. So I think this was kind of an outdoor, gigantic community menorah. No, I don't think the Hopewell were Jewish. I think they were Native Americans, but somehow there was this community, seemed to be a community of Jewish people who taught them this festival, and they liked it and adopted it as their own, apparently.